Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over how to UV unwrap real quickly. I'm also going to be showing you guys how to set up a subdivision with UV unwrapping for when you have objects with multiple pieces to keep them nicely organized and easy to work with. So let's get started. So here I've created a very basic lamp, nothing too crazy. I was just keeping it kind of simple for the demo purposes. So the first thing you got to remember when UV unwrapping is you want to unwrap it before you start adding anything like turbo smooths or smoothing contact points, anything like that. So what we're going to do is first we're going to do the cylinder, which is the base of the lamp, and we're going to go to modifier list. We're going to hit U on our keyboard and it'll take us to unwrap UVs. We're going to click on that. From here we're going to open the UV editor. Now, when you set up the, when you start the unwrap, it'll automatically just create a seam. Well, this isn't good enough for what we need to do. So we're going to reset. So under peel, on the far right is a reset peel. We're going to reset it. Now, it kind of looks like our object in the UV unwrap editor, but as you notice, there's no more green lines, so we get to unwrap it ourselves. What I like to do is I like to hide any objects that I'm not trying to unwrap, just so it's easier to work around them. So I'm going to hide the sphere. Now, from here we go to our selection, and here we have vertices, edges, and polygons. So vertices works on corners, just like it says. So when you click on them, obviously it highlights, and that's what we work with. And edges, if you can guess, edges, and then polygon surfaces are the full poly surfaces. So depending on what you're trying to unwrap, you have to kind of change which one you're going to use. For our purposes, we're pretty much just going to be working with edges because it's pretty easy because we got a lot of loops. So first things first, we want to identify the areas on the object that we want to unwrap and keep separated. So for our purposes, we want to separate the base. We want to separate this, and then we want to do our bend separately, and then our cone, as well as we want to do the inside and outside separately, as well as the edge on the bottom. So now that we know where we want to unwrap them, because those are going to be the faces that we can texture, and we want to get them as flat as possible. So I'm going to start by, first I'm going to select the objects I want to separate. So we obviously want to separate the base. Double click on the ring on the bottom, and that separates the base from the stem. Then I'm going to double click on the circle at the base of the bend of the stem that I want to separate. Then I'm going to separate it from the cone, so I'll select the line that separates those by holding control and double clicking. And we're going to do the edges, or the cone now. So we'll double click here to separate the front edge. Oh, wrong one. We'll separate the outside cone from the front edge and the inside cone from the front edge as well. And we're also going to separate this inside plate from the inside cone. There we go. So looks like we are actually going to separate this one down here, this side plate of the round, from the top and the bottom. So we will double click here and here. All right, so it looks like we got pretty much everything that we want separated. And we're going to go to the UV editor, and we're going to go to explode, and underneath we're going to hit break. Now you notice that all the red lines turn purple if we unclick the green, so that means those are where our breaks are. Now we're going to hit the peel mode once, twice. The reason why we hit it twice is because the first time it keeps it selected in case we want to make any modifier changes. We're going to pack normalize and see what everything looks like. All right, so it doesn't look bad. Obviously this is too small, clustered, pointed, and you got overlapping lines, so that's not good. This does connect vertices, and this top one is just kind of a mess. So there's a little bit more unwrapping we have to do. So we need to break it apart so that all the seams lay flat. Obviously, circular pieces aren't laying flat at this time because we haven't cut them to lay flat. So once again, we'll use our edge, and we're gonna cut them so that they want to unwrap. And what I mean is here, going around, this is one solid piece, but if we click this line going all the way up, it now flattens this because it'll cut and extend it out. And it also runs all the way through the top and bottom plate. See? And it's going to go all the way up to the top. It does it to the curve. It does it to the outside cone, the outside face, the inside, and then the inside plate, which this one actually we don't need to cut because it's already a flat surface. There's no rounded edges. So we're going to hold Alt and unselect it. We can also unselect any of the extra lines that are inside of each circular object because we only need one cut. So if you just hold Alt and click, they'll disappear. You can also Alt drag and get rid of them. So I will actually do the Alt drag to delete them in sections, or unselect them in sections. Make sure those are still selected. And the same at the bottom. This is already a flat surface, so we actually don't need any of these. Cool. So again, we'll go to our UV editor to explode. We'll break. Again, those are in green. Those are cuts. Just so you can zoom out to see. We will now peel. Click it a second time. Okay. And we'll normalize. Now we can see that all the surfaces are broken up and they're flat. So now we can work on them and create a texture on flat surfaces. Once we're done with that, we can close. Now, I wanted to add a smoothing texture to this because it's got a lot of rough edges, and we don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to modifier list, and I'm going to hit T for turbo smooth, and I'm going to click on the turbo smooth. Now this looks a lot better. This looks more like a lamp because it's nice and smooth. You can change the iterations. Rule of thumb, never go above 4 or 5. If you do, it just creates too many small polys and surfaces, and it just starts to hurt your system. And you usually don't need that many. I'm going to do a second one just to make sure it stays pretty smooth. I'm really happy. So now I'm going to go right-click inside the modifier list after the object is selected, and I'm going to go to collapse all. Once we collapse all, everything is saved as it is, and now we have a base lamp that looks pretty solid. We're going to check our unwraps, make sure that they're still held, click our unwrap UV, open UV editor, and there they are. And now they have all the small subdivisions that we added with the turbo smooth, but they're still separated and flat, which is exactly what we wanted. You can either collapse or delete the unwrap UV. It doesn't matter at this point because it's just going to stay the same as it is. Now we're going to move on to the bulb. So the bulb is in the object. We can hide the, we're going to get the wireframing again, and we're just going to resize this a little bit because it looks like it's a little too big, which we don't want. There we go. Now, we have our bulb, so we're going to hide our cylinder base. Now we're going to go in and we're going to unwrap this. We're going to hit U, unwrap UV. It already gave us a little customized unwrap. It's not very good, way too many lines here, so let's go into UV editor. We're going to reset, we're going to get to working. So remember, you want everything to be on a flat surface. And it's a little trickier when you have these points at the end where there's a lot of stuff going on here. But the trick is to realizing that if you just click on this first outer ring, this created a flat surface. It might be bent, but that is a perfectly flat surface for us to work on. So that is definitely going to be one of our first selections of things we're going to break to make flat. Then we're going to go over here and we're going to select on the edge that separates this little indent for our light bulb, and we're going to do it the same here. So that separates this piece, and then we're going to go up here and we're going to do it to this as well. Now don't forget we need to cut these circulars, put a line on these circulars so that they unwrap nicely. So we're going to go just straight down from the top one. Sorry about that. We're going to go all the way until we connect back to this bad boy. All right, So that's looking pretty good. We've got all of our edges that I think we need to unwrap, and just to double check, we're going to go back to our UV editor, break, unwrap once, twice, and look at that, we got a bunch of flat surfaces. There's a little deformation here. That was from when I was resizing and editing it, so it's not a big deal. I can fix it later, but it's also not visible, so I'm not going to put too much worry on it. Now, because this is going to be a bulb inside of a lamp, I really kind of want to make it a little bit smoother. Spheres are already pretty smooth, but just for safety and making sure that it does look as smooth as it can be, we're going to turbo smooth that as well. Perfect. This looks really great, and just to double check, we're going to make sure it looks really well inside the lamp. Boom. There's our light bulb. Collapse all. Alright, so we have our UV unwraps on both of these objects. Now, when you have multiple pieces inside of a scene, you don't want to unwrap them all together and then try to export it because they might get too small. This project itself isn't that big, so it shouldn't be much of a problem if we just did that way. Yeah, there's a lot of pieces, but it's not that bad. For more complex objects, which I'll show a little later with my table that I just made, it becomes too small for you to even texture because it's just too complex. So I think we'll move on to the table so you can see what I'm talking about. So here we have a table I designed for a scene. This is a little bit more complex because there's a lot of pieces to this. There's obviously the spiral going up the legs. You have the inside piece that's holding the spiral together. Tops, bottoms, the edges of the table, the top, the bottom, the base of the table frame, and the drawer, and the little handle. And then you have the bottom legs. So there's a lot of working pieces on this. And if I were to just unwrap this as it is, it would be way too chaotic. So I'm going to show you real quick what I mean. Open UV editor. This already looks like a lot of information. This looks really rough. So we're going to peel. Let's double check. And my computer's going to take a minute because this is a lot of data information that's going on. Hopefully it doesn't crash. It's completely possible because this is a lot of, yeah, see, this doesn't look good. You can't texture this. These are too small. Like, we have to really zoom in to see them, and it just does not work. Even if I were to normalize, put them in order, which might take a second again, because again, there's a lot of little pieces. This is too small. We can't do anything to this. We can't take this into Substance Painter and clean it up, I should say. So how you solve this problem is you create what's called a subdivision. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's unclick on this object because we don't need that anymore. Up here on the top of the toolbar, you have what's called a material editor. We're going to click and open that. I already have it pretty well subdivided. So this is what we're just going to start over to show you what we're doing. All right. So we are going to go over here to the material map browser, and underneath there is one called multi-sub object. We're going to drag and drop it in. This is the multi-sub. This allows us to select multiple objects and put them on a scale so that when we put them in a Substance Painter, we can actually have them separated so we can work with them more cleanly. A little trick I do is when you double click, it shows you the IDs of some materials. If you go ahead and just delete all of them, you can't delete the last one, just hit add and then delete again, you're left with a material, which is exactly what you want to work with anyways in the first place. So we need to count how many materials we actually have that we need to group together. For purposes here, we have the full drawer, full leg, another full leg. These are all group objects. These are what we're going to put into subdividers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 materials. So we'll go back to the material editor and we're going to add 11. I know it says 12, but that's because we don't have a 1. Now, to keep yourself organized, I like to color code. So here I'm just going to turn it black, and I'm just going to move down the line just so I make sure that when I select my objects, I'm selecting them the right way, or the right ones that I want, so I color code them. And this might take a second, but it is really helpful for organizing yourself, because if you use gray for all of them, you will not realize what you've selected, and you'll have to go back through and do this again, and just way more work than it's worth. Unless you just like torturing yourself, then feel free to do it if you want. I would not recommend it. So we're going to move on to a little bit more red, and then we can leave one gray, and then this one we'll do all right. Sweet. So now we got different colors. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign these materials to the spots that we want. You can name them underneath the naming convention. I do. So we'll start with the black one. I'll do tabletop. The next one will be drawer. Let's say front, right, front, left, back, right, back, left, spiral, front, right, spiral, front, left, spiral, back right, spiral, back left. I'm going to leave the last one open in case there happens to be one that I maybe forgot about. But for the purposes here, I think I've got them all. All right, so what you're going to do now is you need to be able to see your object, because we're going to, well, not do that. There we go. So here we have our object, and we can clearly see it. Then we're going to take here, and you're going to click and hold on the material that matches the name. So because this is the tabletop, I'm going to click and hold, and then assign to selection, because the selection is, so we're going to assign to object, because I just want to assign it to the first one so you can see it. And there we go. So it has assigned to the tabletop. Now I'm going to assign it to the next part, and I'll just assign to object, and assign to object, and assign to object. Perfect. We've now selected everything that is the tabletop, and it's underneath our material 1, or material 2. We're going to move to the drawer. So right click, drag to our drawer. Now, if you have them set up in groups and selections, you can actually assign to selection. Oh, sorry, wrong. If you select the object first, which, got a little too much stuff going on here. Cool. So if you had them under selection, you could literally just go click on full drawer here. Sorry, they're under a full group. So we're just going to do this by selection by object at a time. So we'll assign this to a drawer, assign to object, assign to object. Nope. Perfect. Front right leg. I'm actually going to ungroup so that way I can, perfect. This is what I wanted. I wanted to have them separated into groups that I can actually manipulate them individually. So front right. So we're going to select, assign to selection. There, perfect, full right. Front left, is going on? Oh, there you go. You just select it. If you don't select it, you can't do it. There you go. Back right. Cool. There we go. We got them selected. I did create some materials for the spirals themselves. I don't think I need them because I think these will be simple enough, and we will double check when we go to unwrap again to make sure everything's still unwrapped properly. If it seems that they're too small, then we will separate the spirals away from the legs themselves. But we are done with our material editor, so we can close this. Now we're just going to go through and double check and make sure everything is unwrapped properly. So first things first, the front right leg, we're going to go to unwrap. We're going to look to see how it looks. Open UV editor. Little space. So we're going to unwrap. Perfect. Now you see that everything's a lot bigger. We can clearly see what every shape is. We'll normalize. Just make sure we get it as organized as possible. I have a lot of curves in my scenes, so it's not going to be absolutely perfect on some of these, but for the most part, the open faces have been laid out as best they can. So that one's perfect. So that is great. We're going to move to the next one, the back leg. If it'll let me select it. We'll do this one first. Again, unwrap UV. Much better. Fantastic. We're going to unwrap this. I know this seems really tedious, but as you get accustomed to doing this, it becomes much easier, and it actually becomes kind of a fun game to try to play in your head. For me, I try to always make them as simple and as clean as I can, and sometimes it can get really tricky when you got too many curves. And also, if you wait to unwrap when you've already added a bunch of like smoothing modifiers and things like that, and complex modifiers, it becomes even more problematic. So remember, always unwrap when it's in its simplest form. Just keeps things a lot easier. Cool. We're going to move to the full drawer. Everything's a little bit bigger, which is great. It means we can see everything. There's a couple little ones here. Those are the back side of the doorknob, which is invisible anyway, so I'm not going to be too concerned about that because we'll never see it. But everything else is visible and easy to edit. And then we have tabletop. Unwrap UV. Open UV editor. Just going to boom and normalize. This is all repetition, guys. Doing this over and over again, you get really accustomed and used to it. Looks great. Now, you notice I didn't collapse any of them during this whole process, and the reason why is because I can literally do them all at once, and it just makes my life a lot easier. So I'm just going to click and shift on all of them. Right click, collapse all. Yes. And now everything should have been closed to the modifier. So let's just double check. Full drawer. See, the modifier list is now collapsed. Full leg, it's collapsed. All right, so I'm gonna pull these into Substance Painter so you can see exactly what the difference is when using subdivisions when it comes to adding to um, textures and things like that to your object. I first have to export all of my objects though. So to export it out of the 3ds Max is really easy. You just go to File, make sure you select the object you want to export. File, export, export selected. If you hit export and you have extra objects in the scene, you'll export everything with it. They'll just be invisible if they're hidden, but they'll still take up data and information when exporting into Substance Painter. So export selected because I just want my table. And then I'm going to save this into one of my files. I got tons of these. Oh, let's do the DA projects. And we're going to call this just table. And we'll save it. Make sure everything looks okay and perfect. All right, guys, now I'm going to move to Substance Painter. I'm going to show you the difference between the lamp and the table when it comes to using those subdivide when unwrapping. All right, guys, so we are back, and here we have our lamp. It's been unwrapped. You can obviously see the UV unmapping here for our lamp, and it's a pretty simple design, so we didn't have to do any subdivisions to this. So just showing you what it looks like inside a Substance Painter. These surfaces that we can see in the UV unmapping are the surfaces that we're able to draw on. That's why it's important to make sure you unwrap things as flat as possible, because obviously we're not going to be painting a 3-dimensional surface. We're painting on a 2-dimensional surface, which will wrap around creating a 3D object. So this is what the lamp looks like, and then we're going to show you what the table looks like, because that one is done with the subdivision. I'm not going to say this because I haven't done anything to it. Okay, so here's the table. Now, as you can see, because of the subdivisions, our texture set list has a bunch of materials on here. And that's really good, because if they were too small in our scene, we couldn't actually add textures to them. But since we did the subdivisions, we now have multiple different material layers that we can work on. And they all look very nice and big, and we can see a lot of surfaces. This is why it's important to learn to subdivide your materials when you got a lot of complex pieces to it, because if we were to try to draw on or put a texture on these spirals, on these legs, if we hadn't subdivided these into multiples, whenever we drew, we would overlap on other texture surfaces, and it would look very bad. It would be really hard to control. It'd be very hard to make it look perfect, and we'd end up with just a crazy mess where, like, maybe we put a little bit of like silver on these. It would end up on the bottom of the desk because they'd be overlapping texture surfaces, and that's just not good for finished products. Anyways, that's all I wanted to show you about subdivisions and unwrapping. I hope you guys learn something and you practice these skills. Like I said, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes, and it just becomes second nature. I remember the first time I did it, it took me like an hour to figure out some of these. Now I can do them in like 15, 20 minutes, no problem. All right, guys, have a good one.